Bandwidth provided by Recursive Squirrel Interactive. Transcription services provided by transcribeme.com. Visit them on the web at transcribeme.com/BeanCast for up to 25% off. That's transcribeme.com. Episode 519, One Really Big Mink. For Monday, November 5th, 2018, it's time for this week's edition of the BeanCast, a weekly discussion about the news and issues facing marketers today. I'm your host, Bob North. Thanks for joining us. Data silos. They're vilified throughout the business world, but are they truly the problem that we imagine? Now that most companies have embraced data activation platforms, are data bottlenecks and IT approval processes the real trouble? Tonight, we'll discuss. Also, why creative sharing should happen earlier, the reasons social may not be reaching millennials, eliminating the Twitter like button, plus this week's AdFail 5. That's the lineup. Let's meet tonight's panel. Thanks for joining us for this week's BeanCast. I'm Bob Norp, and with me on the panel for this evening, we start with creative marketing director and branded content producer for Lumini Productions, as well as the host of the Generation Jones podcast, Ms. Wendy Cooper. Wendy, hi, how are you?
I'm good, Bob. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. Now, also with us, we have the Senior Vice President Innovation at Gray Group, Ms. Alexa DePasquale. Alexa, hi.
Hi, how are you? Thanks so much for having me as well.
Glad that you can get on the program this week. And then finally, we have the Director Digital Transformation at Campbell's, Mr. Samuel Money. How are you, man?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me back, Bob.
Love having you on the program. Well, I'm going to jump right into the topics. The first one's a nice and juicy one, and I think you're going to appreciate it, Sam. We've all heard it said that silos are the bane of a corporation. And data silos are particularly called to the map because they represent the missed opportunities that result from not speaking to customers or prospects with all the information available in hand. But what if silos aren't the issue? There's this fascinating article over on Ad Exchanger that suggests data bottlenecks and IT process are probably the problem more than anything. So, Sam, complicated read for sure. I mean, I spent a long time kind of digesting what this author had to say, but what are your top line takeaways from this article?
Looking at it, it was, I like the way he kind of frames some of the challenges, and he actually sticks up for the technology and the discipline overall.
As he should, you know.
As he should, and so I do warrant people actually reading and digging into it, because he says, look, delivery systems aren't evil. You know, the platforms that's doing what they're supposed to do, and that kind of makes things fragmented. Teams aren't evil, which is good to hear. So it's the idea of the folks working.
It depends on the team you're on. You know that some teams are definitely evil.
It kind of argues the case that, hey, we're just doing what we're supposed to do, and it's then, you know, they're not tasked with fixing how the whole company works. And then, you know, bottlenecks being caused by requests and resource constraints. So I kind of walk away thinking and kind of aligned with some of the sentiment, which talks about fragmented data originates from the way which orgs are structured and MarTech is implemented. So it's about changing responsibilities, goals, and attitudes. And I think he's correct. You can't blame the data. You know, there's a few things going on in the pursuit, and whether it's performance marketing or evidence-based marketing or how you describe it. But it's ultimately a lot of the challenges is the reality of humans and change management. So I kind of walked away from this thinking it's not about whether it's the data in the silos or how you share data. It's ultimately just the fundamentals of, you have a lot of folks vested in the status quo, and it's not necessarily their mission to change. You know, they're not they're not interested in shifting from where they are, and this, especially when it comes to a lot of the technology, there is a lot of complexity and a lot of jargon. So it requires you to be really serious and dig into it. And I just think a lot of the fundamentals of the challenge are just change management. So behavior change, measuring change, organizational readiness and resources. It's just like the fundamentals of change management.
Before I read the article, I was right there with you on that, change management is the real problem. I mean, you really need to create a culture that embraces data platforms and embraces a data-centric worldview. However, I mean, what this guy was really getting at was it's not the matter of adoption. There's some of these companies have 20 platforms. They're over adoption. There's so many different data requests and data opportunities within the organization that it creates bottlenecks, and that IT process is the real problem, that you're not making data more available. Alexa, how much do you find that to be the problem when you're dealing with clients? I mean, it's just like data setup within an organization being more the problem than actual whether or not the data is being used.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm sort of speaking from my previous time actually at a native ad company. And I remember a big problem that we are consistently having with clients is that oftentimes data doesn't speak to one another, right? So you have certain processes and sort of backends that are set up with a level of data that then you cannot ingest that data from the front end appropriately. And so even if you're trying very diligently to actually back up things with data, oftentimes the systems do not work together, and it's become a really big problem. And we're seeing that actually a lot now internally at Gray in terms of clients wanting to see how television is performing, and it's really hard to have the data backends of TV data and analytics be speaking toward the digital front ends that we have in place. And so there's a lot of disconnect between what you can actually understand. And it's a big thing that a lot of companies are trying to solve, but it's actually quite a difficult thing to solve in order to really prove that out.
That's an interesting insight. That a lot of companies want to try to use the data more efficiently, and try to get more out of their data, yet the data isn't speaking to each other. From a standpoint of operationally trying to get things off the ground, is anybody here on this call seeing problems with clients like in the real world, or seeing problems within your own organization where essentially the data is there, the platforms are doing what they're supposed to be doing, you're supposedly be able to get the insights and the actions out of these platforms, yet you're experiencing a bottleneck of you have to get approval through IT to make this actually happen, which is the basic premise of what the article's saying. And it's just like, I'm not sure I've seen that to be a widespread problem within a lot of organizations. Am I wrong about that? Wendy, you seem to have an opinion.
Yeah, of course I have an opinion. So with 20-something years in direct response and data has always been, Alexa mentioned, from television. So back in the day and still today, you look at a television ad and you used to quantify the results of a television ad by just looking at what was coming in through through telemarketing, right, through the 800 numbers. And so we would look at that and we would cross-check that with media, and we would look at the data coming in from all the different silos, right? They're coming in from telemarketing, or they're coming in, now it's coming in digitally, it's coming in from Facebook, it's coming in from Amazon, it's coming in from your television ad, it's coming in from your ads on Instagram, it's coming in from so many more different places, which actually creates multiple silos. So, but it all actually is ending up in my world, or how I read this article, was it's all actually ending up in one place. It's ending up probably logistically at the fulfillment center, which is shipping the product. So the idea that if you want to take all of this data and have it talk to each other, I built my entire company on the fact that I campaign managed direct response campaigns, and I had to take the data coming from all of the different places, which only grew over time, analyze it and drill it down, bring it into basically one silo that the client then wanted you to spit out and say, okay, what is performing? Because at the end of the day, I think the article is really talking about, we have all of these different places that the data is coming from. So how can we just bring it into one place and have it analyzed so that we get what we want
But
from all the data, right?
Well, yeah, I see that as being an issue, but marketing as a whole, or at least marketing analytics and using these data management platforms and putting data into action, it implies that you're supposed to be a little bit more nimble, that you're able to react faster to data cues that are coming in. And yet these data cues, according to the article, are being bottlenecked at the IT level. And that because the process is in place to make sure that the data is kept safe and that everything is run through a certain set of approvals, that data is not accessible when it needs to be accessible, and that the platforms are doing their jobs, that we have this information, but we're not able to act on this information.
Well, that's exactly what I'm talking about. So, and I think until you have one specification for all of the data coming in, where everybody's, here's a perfect example. If you want to sell a product direct and you go onto a shopping network, let's use it for instance, Evine or HSN or whomever. Today, not years ago, but today, now you have to go through a commerce hub. So this is a place that all of the orders and things like that go through Commerce Hub. They stop at Commerce Hub, and Commerce Hub then sends them onto your fulfillment center, which then handles all of your CRM and your shipping logistics. And then they send all of that information back to Commerce Hub. Commerce Hub then charges, a lot. To then send it back to Evine. Now, Jet has this, Walmart has this, Target has this. And so, but each one has different specifications for that data to be brought into, let's say, one place, Commerce Hub, and then funneled down to the client or to the customer and, to the client. And then we have to look at that data and we have to analyze it. Well, where did it, you're using it for CRM. You're using it for marketing. You're using it for your projections, your inventory projections. You're using it for a lot of different reasons. So does that mean that the specifications for media buying, for instance, are going to be the same thing as the specifications for your inventory, projections? So that's, I think, where the problem really comes from, is that all these different departments, all these different IT departments are using it for, sorry, you guys, I'm a little under the weather today, but are using it for their specific reasons until there's one big umbrella that basically says, here's the specifications, use these specs, bring it all in, which is what really Amazon does. And then you can pull the data that you need depending on your department. Then it's not going to happen. And it's only actually going to grow more silos because you only have more places that information is coming from, whether it be marketing, finance, or whatever it might be, media.
Sam, we're talking about silos. Everybody's bringing up the silos. Are silos really a problem anymore? I mean, Wendy points out that we're creating more and more silos in the current setup, that everybody has more data. But it seems to me from the course of this article and from the course of this conversation that it's more about data sharing, that there's a sharing problem going on. Is that your understanding, or you have a different opinion?
I'm torn, because as I listen to everyone in this conversation, I'm just trying to sort of channel the reality I see, and I think there is, and especially if you're just wearing a marketing hat, I think it's to do with the shift in how marketing has evolved from, say, 10, 15 years ago and now into today. And so, I saw a good quote from the Clorox CMO, and he was basically talking about the transformation, the shift that they've had in their organization, where they've forced everyone to basically sit together and work together. And it's going to be uncomfortable if you're an SME, but just to have a collective view, because they had to change the way they were working. And you can't manage technical silos and then sort of functional silos in how you work. So you all got to come together and then determine what you're trying to achieve and all work to that aim. So the silos exist, but I think from certain CMOs and senior leaders, their mission is to drive demand and engage with their audiences, and they're going to have to make this stuff work for them. And so yes, there may be technical or data sort of cleanliness or synthesis sort of technical stuff, but I just think it's just a fundamental, what are we trying to achieve and how do we all get on the same page as an organization, be it marketing, research, insights, product, R&D, and all kind of come together to have a common view and a common understanding. That for me is I know that most leaders are shifting in that direction. So I don't know if that answers your question or not, but I'm coming at it from the human side and the organizational design side, and they are looking to break the silos and join things up, because they're losing to, the big brands especially are losing to smaller brands who are more nimble, who are more agile, and who can get to the point and leverage it a lot faster. So the larger companies are changing, and we'll see over time. But as I say, there was a good sort of, I think from his ANA conference presentation last week, Association of National Advertisers, the Clorox CMO sort of presentation saying, yeah, we shifted. It's too soon to tell how it's working, but we had to change how we were doing things because we're losing to the smaller brands and we can't afford to continue to do that.
But hasn't it always been somewhat of a problem that, if we simplify it and we just say the different departments in an organization don't sit down and speak to each other, right? Yeah. So I don't really see the difference unless there can be some type of platform that this data can be fed into. And, the software written to, well, marketing department wants to see this coming out of it, and IT department wants to see this coming out of it, and finance wants to see this coming out of it. But it's one place that the data gets fed into.
It's not a single place. It's never
at the table.
It's never a single place, though, and that's the issue. Or maybe it's not. Maybe it's not the issue. Is what I'm getting at. Maybe it's okay for there to be lots of data silos as long as these different platforms and these different databases are actually talking to each other in a meaningful way and enabling activity, enabling action on that data as quickly as possible without any kind of bottleneck. And I think that's a reasonable expectation, because when, Alexa, you know better than anybody. I mean, I know a lot about your background. Within an organization, they can have as many as 20, 30, 40 different platforms sometimes running, creating data silos left and right. That's just the reality. There is not going to be a dashboard to rule them all. So how do we fix this? How do we make it so that the data is talking to each other more effectively throughout the organization? Not that you have the magic wand or answer, but am I right or am I missing something?
No, you're completely correct. I think the biggest thing is, so what we did, particularly when I worked at startups, you really have to stay attached to what your vision is and understand where is your audience, where is the most meaningful data coming from, and how do you sort of pour everything into that 1, 2, 3, whatever it is, platforms, right? You can't be sort of a master of all. And it's really understanding what is working, giving the testing and sort of A/B testing of optimization between all the different platforms, and then recognizing, okay, this is working for us. Why is this working for us? And let's keep pouring into that platform. The biggest problem too, from a data perspective, is we have to recognize and remember, frankly, and be humble about the fact that these platforms will continue to evolve. So even the way that Instagram or Facebook or any of your other sort of moat analytics, et cetera, the way that they are today will not be the way that they are 6 months from now. And so we're consistently trying to keep up with that, which means you really have to do sort of zone in on what is working for you, your company, and your audience, instead of worrying about how do I make everything work for me, because it's just not going to happen right now.
Well, this is a fascinating but exhausting conversation, so I'm going to move on to the next.
I think, Bob, we're all saying the same thing.
I think we are. And it's just that whenever you get into the data question, it just is such an exhausting problem. There are so many different data platforms that work at once, and there's no way to get away from silos, but there is a way to have these platforms play nicer together and communicate better and enable them to activate faster on what needs to be done in order to, satisfy the customer. And it's just like nobody seems to have any solutions yet to this problem. It's something that we know needs to be fixed, but how does it get fixed? Is it an operational fix? Is it a technology fix? I think the answer is still outstanding on that one.
I know the answer. You just use one platform. I think Jeff Bezos has got that, wrapped around his finger. You just sell everything on Amazon.
I don't know a single company out there that's adopted a single platform. They all use multiple platforms. But well, anyway, we'll move on, and we're going to talk next about when to share creative ideas. It's an interesting article over on Medium that kind of sets the stage for why certain agencies are more creative than others. We'll get to that in just a minute, but first, a word from AdRoll.
After months of strategizing and prepping budgets and looking at how we're going to position ourselves in the market, I didn't have anyone to fall back on. And I remember pulling the lever for all those campaigns, biting my nails, and just staring at the computer pretty much the entire day. This was the moment where, okay, we hired this guy to do exactly what he's saying. Now it's up to him to deliver. Trying to figure out the best way to serve ads to our customers. To me, it was a black box. AdRoll came in and said, we should target these users at this cadence, this frequency. We doubled our revenue based on what we were projecting for November, December. Succeeding after I've put myself on the line like that, it does give me confidence.
To find out how TeePublic and 37,000 other brands grow their businesses with AdRoll, visit adroll.com/BeanCast. That's adroll.com/BeanCast.
Now, like I was mentioning, over on Medium, journalist Warren Berger examined the creative dilemma of when to share your ideas. Now, the basic premise is that the top creative shops always share as soon as possible and comment often. There was this great example about Lee Clow's example within TBWA Chiat Day, how he used to always make the creatives show their work as soon as they could and show iterations and comment on it live on a wall. Whereas the mediocre talent shops, the ones that do the pedestrian ads that nobody talks about after they see them, they protect their ideas and wait until the last minute to share. Now, this is one person's opinion, Wendy, but is the fear that others might steal ideas and this hoarding and withholding of creative concepts until the last minute, is it actually harming the creative process? What's your take on that theory?
Well, I think creative without collaboration isn't creative at all. So I think if you're a creative, you absolutely need collaboration. Sharing your idea, how soon should you share your idea? Well, sometimes I think if you share your idea too soon, it hasn't, creative is a process. And so,
but you just finished saying that it's just like that creative is a sharing process. So
yes,
I mean,
the genesis of the idea, Bob, it comes from one person, right? It could come from 5 people, but they all have different creative ideas. So if it's an agency and they're going to pitch an idea, then I'm not sure I really understand why anybody would wait until the last minute to tell their idea, unless their idea completely sucks and they already know that they have the gig, and so they're going to share their idea because it doesn't matter. Or it's a huge account and everybody gets into a room and they iterate and iterate and iterate and they make that concept really awesome. I can't think of a time in my career where my creative didn't get better. My idea didn't get better because I collaborated with a team or with someone else, or we changed the color palette, or changed the font, or did even in a commercial, sitting there and and editing out a commercial, you build the storyline and you look at it, and then the editor throws something in and you go, you know what? How could I have not thought of that? That's awesome. So, I'm not too sure of the relevancy of this article because it's kind of silly.
But it's not when you dig into it, because there are a lot of shops where there's this very real fear, and maybe not a true statement. It may not be really happening, but there's this real fear that if I show this too soon, I'm going to either have the idea shot down, or I'm somehow going to have to deal with someone trying to steal my idea.
Okay, but that's so nebulous, Bob. It's like, what are we talking about here? What is the too soon? Is it the too soon to the client?
Well, that's what I'm asking.
To the team?
Well, that's what I'm asking, because you expressed the fact that maybe sharing an idea too soon would not be a productive process, and that there's a certain point where the idea reaches a certain level of germination where it's ready for comment.
That's where can you clarify? Sharing the idea too soon to the client, or
I'm talking internally. I'm talking internally. I'm definitely talking internally. Right. Maybe with the client if the client's collaborative, but I'm mainly talking about this idea of sitting on that creative idea until it's fully blown out and then showing it as a piece of art, as opposed to showing the concept and its rawest form and starting the iterative process of getting comments as early as possible.
I think that's a personal thing. There are some creatives that they don't want to show their idea until it's perfected. Absolutely. But then there's other people that don't mind working with the team and doing iterations and coming up with something as a team. I really think it really depends on the people you're working with.
And that brings up another thought, Alexa, which is, what is the team? Because I know that creatives tend to want to hold on to their ideas and keep it within the creative department until the last minute, before they're willing to share it around the typical ranks of the account management portion of the agency. I don't know that that's your experience, but can you speak to that? It's just like, is there any benefit in getting everybody involved in the process of iterating creative and trying to get a group think, or is that going to kill or squash ideas prematurely before they've had a chance to nurture?
Yes, absolutely. So it's a great question. So first off, from the perspective of groupthink, a lot of times I've seen and walked into meetings where there are 50 people in a meeting, and I'm kind of like, this is not really the most productive amount of time. However, you could cut that down to 20 people who are the most crucial people on different teams. And this is something actually Gray does really well, where we consider ourselves borderless, which means we're borderless between teams and different units, and also borderless between sort of our global agencies, right? So New York can work with Brazil and can work with West Coast and so on and so forth. And so I think it's actually really important to get multiple stakeholders in the room who come from different backgrounds. So for example, as you mentioned earlier, I'm on our innovation team. That was never really viewed, quote unquote, as a creative department lead until, this past year, where we recognized that, wow, these people actually have a different perspective on briefs than most people do and traditional creatives do. And so when we get in the room with our social media team, our digital team, our traditional team, so on and so forth, we're creating a different conversation around a brief than would, the standard account strategy creative team on one specific brand, right? So when you're including a lot of people, I kind of agree with Wendy, where the earlier you do that and the more collaborative you can be, the better an idea can actually become, because you've got multiple stakeholders and different viewpoints shaping what it is that you're bringing to the table.
But let's back up for a second. We're obviously, any creative idea or any creative process can benefit from the feedback from the entire agency, or at least the entire team that's working on the account at some point. But how soon should that process begin? I mean, I think that's what's called into question. And, you know, is a raw idea meant to be shared throughout the agency and get everybody's feedback? Is
No.
that going to be productive, or is it?
No.
You don't think
Thank
that?
you. Yeah, no, that's a waste of time, Bob.
So when would you say the process begins? I mean, it's just like, because I you know, having worked in a creative department, having dealt with these issues, a lot of this is really hitting close to home. I mean, yes, having the clothesline put out there where all work by the end of the day had to be hung up on the clothesline and be free to be commented on by anybody walking by was a really helpful process in developing creative thoughts. It didn't necessarily come down to someone in the account side saying you need to change this. It was just thoughts, and you could take or leave them as you developed your idea. And it was a really helpful process. But I can see that too early meddling from somebody who's not really well suited for dealing with the creative product can be a problematic situation that can actually thwart the creative juices that are going on at that given time.
Well, creative is so subjective, right? So if you're coming up with an idea, you know, have you ever come up with an idea and you thought, you know, you run into to your coworker's office or something like that? I've got a great idea. It just hit me. And you go in and you pitch the idea, and they look at you like you're crazy. Why? Because it is not the same thing in their head as it is in your head. Right? So an idea has to get to a certain point where it can be represented and presented in a way that people can visualize it. And I don't know, Alexa, if you agree with me or not, but where it can be visualized as a team as opposed to visualized as individuals who are thinking something else in their head completely. You know, so you do have to get it to a certain point before you present. I believe always.
You know, I just thought I'd add to the perspective. Listening in from the client side is fascinating, getting an eye into the other side and what goes on. And I found it quite interesting trying to collaborate and to get partner with agencies, because there was this certain distance that has been put in place, and almost you're kept out of that cycle or that process. And for me, in terms of my analogies are concept development, innovation, or ideation processes. And very similarly, there is a bit of a threshold, right? You've got to gestate it to a degree, but I'm definitely on the side of sharing often, sharing early, having that clothesline and getting different inputs and having that sort of diverse and inclusive scope of people and participants, because the unlocks and the greatest ideas is when you bring different people together and you have a clash of ideas which creates something new. So I'm quite nervous if there's a sentiment of, hey, let's hold off as long as possible. And actually, I tend to err on early and often, because, and it's providing there's a diverse group of people from different functions, different, as you said, talked about different geographies, different countries or worldviews, and to avoid groupthink. That's so critical. And from a client side, I'd like to hear that was definitely happening versus not happening if I was thinking about potential agency partners. And the best agencies I've worked with, I think they bias towards the definitely the collaboration up front and sharing up front.
You're a very unusual client, though. I want to point that out, Sam, because it's just like you actually are a great collaborator. I mean, you're somebody who gets involved with a project and really wants to collaborate in the process, doesn't want to just hear about the idea as soon as possible so that they can go, no, I don't like that. That's not you.
Yeah, and I think my pet peeve in marketing is that I know it when I see it type client. There are too many marketers, and I'm speaking from the client side perspective. There are too many marketers, too many CMOs, too many senior leaders who know it when they see it, which is why you get 28 revisions, and I hate that. It drives me absolutely insane. And so yes, perhaps why I bias the other end, because I think there's a lot of people who haven't been trained well, who know it when they see it, and that's just awful, because what if you're wrong and you got all the power and you got the decision making rights? Yeah. And so for me, that's why I'm sending out this sentiment. But as I said, I'm listening in from the client side to how the agencies work, and it's fascinating to hear the tension and the challenge in doing it.
Well, I think if you always ask the right questions to the client and you get the answers from the client, as long as you have to do your research. So if there's an RFP out there and they say, well, it has to be this and purple and blue colors, or it has to be whatever, I think you have to really dig deeper with the client into give me some visuals you hate, give me some visuals you love, right? Give me show me some examples. I always try to go really deep with the client before I even come up with a concept. And then that concept really takes time to, because it will change. It'll change 3 or 4 times in my own mind before I feel comfortable saying, okay, I've listened to the client, I've done my research, and here is what I believe, is the concept or the idea. And then I would present that. Am I presenting it to the client? No, I'm presenting it to my collaborators, my team I'm working with.
That's pretty typical of a really great healthy creative department there, Wendy. I mean, it's just like that kind of approach where you kind of nurture it, you share it, you iterate it within the organization, and then you show it to the client. But would the entire creative process be made better if more clients were like Sam and were willing to accept that the idea that they're seeing is not going to be the idea that's going out live, and that we're just sharing this as part of the collaborative process and keeping you in the loop and getting your feedback and making sure that everything's firing throughout this process of coming up with the idea? I mean, in theory, that's the way everything should be run. In theory, that's the best way to operate. But in practice, it's very rare to come across a person like Sam. I mean, most organizations are exactly like he says. You have these people out there, marketing directors, who are like, I'll know it when I see it, and I'll just pick it when I do.
Well, the author of this article we're talking about is Warren Berger. I'm a huge fan. He wrote a great book called A More Beautiful Question. And it's this idea of the power of inquiry to spark breakthrough ideas. So it's the art of asking great questions. And if you can train my tip to all agency side people, if you can help the client help frame the right questions. And I think on the call earlier that came up, it's all about asking great questions, great propelling questions, and then step back. So help, shape and prompt with great questions, and let the agency and the other folks perhaps take the lead in solving that. But it's really peeling the onion and asking the right fundamental questions. And that is the huge unlock. And he's written a couple of books about that. But I think that's the core of what is driving this whole debate, is what are the right questions and how do we get to these propelling questions to unlock the opportunities to drive solutions or drive growth or to win with that consumer.
That's right. Very well said.
Well,
completely.
Well, I'm going to move on because we are running low on time, and I want to make sure we get to these next next couple topics. First up, millennials are supposedly all on social media. That's what we hear all the time. Everybody in the millennial generation is on social media. So, of course, marketers spare no expense on reaching Gen Y individuals on social platforms. And yet, election research shows that 45% of millennials haven't seen a single political ad this election cycle, and brands are still failing at connecting with younger Americans. They're less brand loyal than ever before. So, Alexa, what's going on, and are marketers betting on the wrong platform for reaching millennials?
Wow. So what a loaded question, because we've been talking about this tons. So a couple of things. I mean, first off, a brand really needs to understand where they're communicating with their audience best and who their audience is. And I said this earlier, and I cannot sort of preach it enough, just because we've had lots of conversations with all the leading platforms about how we sort of better our communication as a representation of our brands. And the biggest thing is, today's day and age in terms of advertising is no longer that push model where people are willing to see these ads. for them to actually absorb the ads, it needs to be content that is relevant and is engaging. And frankly, a lot of times content that is actually co-created where consumers feel like they're part of that process. And I think a lot of times what happens is brands get lost and just sort of push out their ads, hoping that people see it. But now we're smarter as a group of consumers, and we sort of just pass through it. And so, when we look at even from the politics cycle of, I don't know where the stats per se come from, but is Facebook the right platform for you to be doing that? Is Instagram the right platform? Who knows? The point is that you actually need to engage in someone's lifestyle so that they can feel like they're part of that process, even if you're an ad. And that's actually how things sort of come to fruition. And in particular, we've been talking a lot, and brands, frankly, have been talking a lot about influencer marketing, but not even like hardcore influencer marketing. It's more micro influencers. So
Right.
people sub 10,000 followers who are the ones that actually have influence. So, 6 or 7 years ago, I remembered speaking to a startup about the difference between influence and influential, right? People who are small in scale, but have the ear of their sort of core group are actually the ones who are influential versus the people who have influence because they have 100,000 plus followers. So it's very different. And this is where a brand needs to get very smart in understanding who do we speak to, how do we speak to them properly, and how do we kind of co-create the appropriate content that people feel that they're willing to ingest, and not even just ingest, but actually then go and speak about to their core group, because that's actually how things spread.
But it's not just the quality of the content, though, that's not connecting with consumers. You also have the issue of whether or not social media as a whole is the best way to connect with a millennial generation. They may be on the platform, they may be using it, using all these different platforms ad nauseum, but it doesn't mean that they're connecting with ads or brand messaging or any kind of other type of communication that's promotional. And for me, that leads to the question, is social media the best platform for us to be exploring using, as opposed to maybe doing live events, as another article that was posted in the show notes was suggesting.
Or sending them something in the mail.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I remember there was a stat several years back. I'm not sure if it's still true, but it really blew me away that millennials are more likely to actually pick up the phone and call a brand when they have a problem, as opposed to using all these chat windows, which seem to be more adopted by older Americans. And for me, that blows me away. It shows me that there's a real premium when you're interacting with a brand to actually talk to a human being and to actually connect with live individuals who are actively promoting and representing the brand in a positive light, having some kind of experience,
Yep. 100%. This is exactly so. I mean, I, for one, don't use Facebook as often. I've deleted every dating app I've ever used. I'm totally in that generation that's like, how do I actually retract from technology as best I can, right? But that's where the brands, and this was to Wendy's sort of earlier point of how do you leverage other options? So direct mail, experiences, so on and so forth. How do you actually circumvent the situation that people are coming offline? And how do you create a better sort of in-person experience for what's happening? And we're seeing this a lot actually with startup companies. So, the Caspers of the world, Everlane, so on and so forth, that were typically online direct-to-consumer companies are actually now leveraging brick and mortar stores and frankly performing better in brick and mortar environments because it's creating an opportunity for people to sort of revel in that brand, right? And it's a very different time now where brick and mortar is sort of having its resurgence because the level of engagement that people want to have in the real world instead of just consistently looking down at their phones we're hitting a tipping point. It's not there quite yet where people are sort of putting their phones away and saying, never mind to social media platforms. And I don't know that it'll ever get there. But I do believe that we're becoming a more conscious and mindful group, and particularly as millennial parents are actually starting to bring up Gen Z folk, which, they're digital natives without question. And Gen Z is like the largest growing market right now that's having conversations around all the social media platforms. There's still this millennial parent that's sort of helping to educate their children around how you balance between online and offline experiences. And it's a delicate line, and not every brand can play in both spaces. And this is where, going back to our earlier conversation, data is so unbelievably important to understand what is working, what's not working, and how you leverage that to the best of your abilities.
Sam, I know you have a lot to offer on this particular subject. So, what's your take on this? I mean,
I think the original scope or the space was talking about they hadn't seen any political ads, and as I've been just perhaps applying that lens to the conversation, it's been really interesting because a lot of the thought leaders and the experts are saying, there's two things you want in from the political ads. You either want someone to vote or send you money. And so the grassroots, the knocking on doors, experiential, local office, everything seems to have been pushed very much to local experiences and local hands-on advocacy and influence as the only way to really change things. Is if you want to get people to the ballot box, it could be the logistics of local people organizing who they're going to drive to the polling booths and things like that. So I actually think a lot of that sentiment of the shift, influencer, and who are the actual influencers on a more micro level versus a macro level, especially in the political space, seemingly is important. But I mean, I'm just outside of the millennial age cohort, and I know that Spotify sent me a playlist. No thanks, Spotify. That was really. But the Lyft providing free rides to the polling booths was, for me, very on brand, very on equity, and very relevant to the actual problem. And then the third point is political ads. They tend to, unfortunately, in the current climate, they are kind of negative and horrible. And I don't know what age group you are, but I'm very uncomfortable with the current state of just political advertising.
I'm just outside of millennials.
Agreed. That's why I'm avoiding that exact topic, because I don't want to do that 48 hours out.
But political ads, regardless of the election or anything like that, but it's the only time pretty much that we see political ads. And political ads, I think, are targeted television political ads. They're local broadcast, because for this election, it's on the local level. It's CNN cover-up ads or whatever if you're watching CNN, and you're seeing them more and more on television. I use Instagram a lot, and I don't see any political ads on Instagram. I have to be honest with you.
And conversely, millennials are fleeing from live broadcast news. I mean, that's not where.
But it's not news, Bob. It's not news. It's inserted in programming. So if my son is watching the Laker game or something like this, a political ad is going to come up. They're why he's watching it on Fox or whatever, but.
But regardless of whether or not the political ads was a convenient way to enter into a conversation that's much broader, which is, whether or not social media solutions actively engage with millennials. I mean, the conventional wisdom is that if you want to reach millennials, you go to the platform that they use the most, which is Instagrams, WhatsApp, Snapchat. It's just like that you're going to get more connection with the people if you use these platforms. But that doesn't seem to be the case. That live events and actual experiential, and like Sam said, getting out there and knocking on doors.
Yes.
That these are the ways that you connect with the millennial generation. I say this all the time. I hate lumping together an entire age group and calling them millennials, because obviously that age group is very diverse and has lots of different motivators. And my tired trope is that every millennial is one minivan away from being like everybody else in the country. So I mean, it's just like life stages matter in people.
Well, the world isn't made up of just millennials. There's Gen X, there's Generation Jones, by the way. There's boomers. There's all sorts of different people that need to be targeted. I am not sure why millennials are such a big deal all of the time when it comes to marketing.
Money.
You know, it's just
they buy stuff.
Is it money? Is it really money?
It is. When you said in the last 5 years, if you said millennial multicultural, you got the money for whatever you were asking for. So it was a shorthand, being slightly facetious here, but it was a shorthand to getting. Now I think it's big data isn't now buzzword that you get funded. So it's a shortcut that, yes, it's passé, because anyone listening to this knows that if you're going to group a bunch of people and say they're all the same by using that label, it's a flawed mindset, but it's just a shortcut to help us explain the world. But yes, and I think a good marketer, a good advertiser would now know that that's kind of a bit of an eye roll if you drop millennial and then try and justify what you're trying to do or how you're doing it.
Well, I'm gonna move on to the last topic because it dovetails nicely into this social media conversation. Twitter has decided that eliminating their like button is the key to enhancing the quality of the conversation on their platform. Sam, this is an interesting thought. Do we believe it's true?
Well, I have a confession to make.
Yes.
I only updated the Twitter app for the first time in, I don't know, probably a year today, because I hate updating social media apps, because every time I do that, the ad unit gets bigger and more obnoxious and more intrusive. So I fight it to the death. But anyway, I updated it today, and I only just discovered they've actually they got the bookmarking functionality. So getting rid of the like button is feasible because I can still save all the stuff I want through the bookmark functionality. So I actually can see the benefit of it. And in all seriousness, as you start to analyze screen time and the huge issues of addiction to these technologies and platforms, I think they're going to have to start doing things to show that they are being more purposeful and more human and a bit more thinking about the impacts on society by literally removing the like button, and when it's being shown to have sort of negative consequences and negative behaviors in the real world. So I think it is something that they can remove, because for me the benefit was saving stuff I want to get back to easily, and that wasn't liking it, that was bookmarking it. And so I think it could be true, and I would be all for getting rid of it.
You know, I know a lot of social media managers out there are not upset about this news, because one of the first things I heard from a lot of social media managers about the Twitter like button is that they absolutely hate it. It's not a meaningful engagement in any way, shape, or form. And that, you know, really when you're on Twitter, you want to go for the retweet or you want to go for the comment. You need to get engagement with the content, and you need to get amplification from the content. But the last thing you need is this like button that has absolutely no relevance and doesn't raise the profile of what you're actually saying. And I think that's clearly, this is not about raising the quality of conversations as much as inspiring people to take action on the content in a way that's going to benefit the brands who are advertising on this platform. So I'm calling BS on the quality of conversation here, Alexa. I don't know about you, but I mean, I'm just like looking at this and I'm going, this is entirely a move meant to satisfy brand managers.
It's possible. You know, funny enough, I'm laughing here with Sam about how he has not updated the app in a while. And frankly, I haven't even used the app in a while because like I got so bored with it. The one thing I'll say, though, from a psychological perspective, and this is something that I'm actually deeply passionate about just as a human being, not as a marketer, but just how social media impacts our brain and the way that we psychologically interact with the world, right? So we all understand that every time we get a like, whether it's on Twitter or on Facebook or on Instagram or a heart or whatever, that is a burst of dopamine, right? And so the way that I look at it is every time that someone likes something, it is leaning towards social proof, and it's giving whatever perspective or whatever comment someone is making, it is giving more weight to what someone is saying. And so taking that button away sort of evens the playing field, I guess you could say, from how people are receiving the public opinion and how you then potentially and frankly, subconsciously sort of meld your thoughts into what it is that you're liking. And so it's a very interesting thing. I would have a different and probably more passionate answer if it were either Facebook or Instagram as a platform. It's just funny that this is Twitter. And I feel like Twitter, unfortunately, at this point in time, is figuring out how do they play in this world of social media conversation. And this might be some way that they're sort of injecting themselves and figuring out how they reinvent themselves, frankly, to be part of that new frontier.
So can this be clarified for me a little bit? So are we only talking about ads and ad likes on Twitter, or are we talking about the conversations that are happening on Twitter?
No, they're talking about removing the like button, the little heart that's on the bottom of every post. They're talking about removing that completely from the platform in order to inspire a higher-minded conversation instead of these drives for likes, which quite frankly, I don't understand because like I say, social media managers do not like the likes. They're not something that's useful to them.
So isn't it kind of two different things? And if it's the conversation happening on Twitter and it's just a conversation about, what's happening today or somebody's making, in the news or something like this. And if it was for an ad, as a marketer, I think I would want the like button to stay on my ad, right? As someone
but that's
using
the whole
Twitter
thing.
For conversation, I could care less really about the
why most social media managers, why most brands are on Twitter is to generate amplification for their message. And you don't get any amplification from a like. You only get amplification from retweets. So retweets are the gold standard, the resharing of content. And that commenting and actually engaging with the content is useful for informational purposes and understanding what the client desires, what the customer is looking for. These types of engagements are very valuable. The like on Twitter has always been an also ran. It was initially a bookmarking function that was just kind of turned into a like. And that's the problem with it. I mean, it's just like it serves no purpose. But I just still believe that it has no meaning for trying to create deeper conversation. This move is all about just getting people to retweet content, which is going to make the platform more valuable to the brands who are involved with it. But, well, got to move on. It's time for the Ad Fail 5. But before we get to that segment of the show, I do want to take this quick opportunity to thank my guests again and allow them to each do a shameless plug, starting with Wendy Cooper. You can find her at lumini.com. That's the home of Lumini Productions, where she is doing fantastic work. I'll let her explain it. What's going on in your world? What would you like to promote?
Well, yes, I am at Lumini, and we work with movie trailers at Lumini. So it's a post facility, but we work with the big movie trailers that you see. So it's visual effects and things like that. So if anybody has a movie trailer and they need visual effects or 3D conversions or anything like that, then give me a call there. But what I really want to promote is my new podcast. So it is called Generation Jones. It is conversations with remarkable people that shape our world. And for those of you that don't know, and it seems like there's a heck of a lot of people that don't, Generation Jones are the people that are born between 1954 and 1964. They are 50 million strong. And they are by the way, most influential piece of the population currently alive. And so I just wanted to focus in on my new podcast on the wisdom of this generation and the power of this generation, and have great conversations with wonderful people that really continue to shape our world. So that's what I'm doing. And you can find it at generationjonespodcast.com or anywhere you download your podcasts.
And if you follow Wendy, you can find lots of information about this podcast. I've been really following this with a lot of anticipation. So thank you very much for your efforts on that. And definitely everybody out there should check out the show. Next up, we have Alexa DePasquale. You can find her at gray.com. That's the home of Gray Group, which is the mothership for Gray Advertising and many other great fine operations within that particular operating segment of WPP. So tell us, what's going on in your world, Alexa? What would you like to promote?
Absolutely. So I would love for, anyone who's looking for an injection of creativity across all of your platforms, We do it all. Obviously, Gray is a global agency that sort of fosters all of the best brands in the world. And so I'm very, very proud to be part of the organization and sort of leading the innovation group. And from a personal note, I'd love to promote following me on Instagram. It's FLEXYD, FlexiD. I am super involved in the fitness world. I'm a competitive powerlifter and have, recently started retraining for different things. And so I'm a huge believer that your health and wellness comes first, and that ultimately creates better creativity. And that's sort of why I'm creating an environment between fitness and the advertising world that I am in. So
I
thanks.
forgot to mention to everybody that Alexa is a badass. So definitely, you definitely want to follow her,
Yes.
find out more about what she's involved with. Last but not least, Sam Money. You can find him at Campbell's.com. You know the name. It's the same company that brings you the soups. So tell us, what's going on in your world, Sam? What would you like to promote?
Well, Bob, thanks for that brand plug. So I think you did it so wonderfully. I'm going to give back to the audience, and I'm going to say we talked earlier about the story from when to share creative ideas, and I mentioned the author of that piece and a book called A More Beautiful Question. I think he's got a new book coming out, and it's by Warren Berger, and it's this idea of just asking great propelling questions and the art of doing that, and why it's so hard and why we find it really difficult as people, especially as you get older and in your career, you actually tend to ask less questions, but that can unlock your business challenges. So I'm going to plug Warren Berger's books because I use them and I find them helpful in solving my business challenges. So there you go, Bob.
Fantastic. Yeah, definitely out there. Check out his books. That's a good recommendation, Sam. As for me, for more information about me or the show, visit thebeancast.com. There you can find a complete show archive. You can find out how to consult with me. You can even find out how to advertise on the program. So check it all out at thebeancast.com. And don't forget, we now have transcription services from transcribeme.com. Go to transcribeme.com/beancast. They'll give you 25% off your first offer or your first transcription. So check it out at transcribeme.com/beancast. And now it's time for the Ad Fail 5, a rundown of the lowest moments in advertising, marketing, public relations from the last week. And first up, the surest sign that people may be lying to you is when they are selling you something that they won't let their kids get near. The New York Times exposed the fact, Alexa, that this is exactly what's happening to the tech world. They're addicting us to their apps while banning mobile screens from their own children. I thought this article was fascinating when I read it because I'm sitting there going, yeah, this makes total sense. It's just like the people closest to the technology would know how harmful it is.
I'm laughing along with you because unfortunately this is so true. I do see, though, that the companies are, as best they can, trying to create ways that we become more mindful of these things. So funny enough, actually, 48 hours ago, I received my first ever report from my new iPhone that said, you've spent 10% less time on your screens than you have previously. So they're now building in these features that allow individuals to become mindful of how much time they're spending. Because, again, unfortunately, it is an addictive device. And now what they're trying to help us understand is how you, that's not even a word, but unaddict yourself, which is become more mindful of how much time you're spending and what you're doing on it. It's really difficult, though. And unfortunately, I fall victim to this all the time. So it is hard. I think the biggest thing that I've seen, particularly, and I'm not a mom, but I've seen people who are about to be moms or new moms, and families, frankly, help to kind of craft the amount of time that one interacts with the screen and understand what that interaction looks like, feels like, how that works as an interaction, and what they're doing on those screens. I think monitoring some of that is really important. But listen, it's, it makes me giggle because it's true. It's really hard to detach people from what is addicting.
But it's actually pretty simple. Your iPhone or your iPad is not the babysitter.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I think that's at the heart of this. It's like the technology savvy parents understand that you can't just leave the device unattended with your child, that you need to have 100%. A little bit more control over it. Well, next up, Facebook may be saying that everything's under control, saying that they're getting their problems under control and that usership is still going up. But a recent study shows that half of all users age 18 to 29, Sam, have deleted the app over the last year. That's not exactly a great statistic, especially since that represents the entire future of their organization.
Yeah, I think Facebook aren't hurting. Well, they're a little bit, but they're not doing too badly, right? And
not now. They're doing fine now, but this number is pretty bad considering the fact that this is the future of their revenue.
That is true, but I think when I read the article, the study didn't quite capture perhaps people reinstalling the app. So I'm curious to see what do people. Yeah, it's easy to delete it today and then reinstall it. It may have just been driven by running out of memory on your phone. But in all seriousness, this is a 101, right, in terms of reputation management, and a lot of folks in organizations spend their time building brand trust and reputation management, and you can measure it in the downloads or the uninstalling of their app as their tracker of what's happening to the reputation. So while you used to measure equity and all other sort of P&L line items for these types of social media companies, this is kind of a good measure of what's happening to their business if people are deleting their apps from their phones.
Well, speaking of the next app that's going to get deleted, remember WhatsApp, Wendy? Remember their promise to never have ads? They're getting ads.
I just started using WhatsApp when I went to Europe because everybody over there uses WhatsApp. And, of course they're going to put ads in there.
Of course they are.
Facebook owns it.
Everybody knew this was going to happen. Everybody knew this was going to happen. It's not a surprise, but surprise. Next up, what happens when you're accused of sexual misconduct and your company finds the allegations credible, Alexa? Well, if you're Andy Rubin of Google, the father of Android, you walk away with a $90 million severance payday and cause a huge stir and a walkout of employees at offices around the world asking for better management of sexual basically bad behavior within their organization. This is really shocking. Another great piece from the New York Times that exposed this happening.
Yes, great. And I think the biggest thing is these things happen. And then the most important thing is, how do you solve for that for the future? So what types of programs are you putting in place? What types of training are you putting in place? What types of data-driven conversations are you putting in place to try and solve for that? But it's something that still needs to be tackled today.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And kudos to the Google employees who took the stand and made a big deal about this. Last but not least, Be a Bell, an Irish beauty company, was called out for its claims that their false eyelashes made of mink fur were cruelty-free because no animals were killed in the making. You see, Sam, pay attention here. You see, the minks were just asked to politely sit still in their cages while they got a quick haircut. This is the most bizarre thing. Okay, no minks were harmed, but the only way to make this happen is we've got to cage minks and keep them on file so that we can give them haircuts every once in a while to make our eyelashes.
Yeah, it could have been I'd like to think it was a genuine mistake, although you may see it as all publicity is good publicity. So let's hope that this was an honest mistake or a misstep versus we could do this to kind of get some earned media coverage, shall we say. The cynic in me might think that, but no, I think they've apologized and fixed it. So that's the main thing, because yes, that's not a good look.
I think Honestly, I think, doesn't it only take one mink to make a whole lot of eyelashes?
It seems to me that if you had that one very furry mink, you'd have enough to make as many eyelashes as you need. But I don't know much. I don't know much about minks, nor do I know much about false eyelashes. So
Thank you for giving me that question, Bob, because I
You're
concur with that
welcome.
sentiment. I was doing the best I could with the limited knowledge I had.
Well, have something to add to this list or just want to discuss it? Comment online. Use the hashtag AdFail5. That's pound AdFail and the number 5. And that does it for this week's show. If you'd like to subscribe to this podcast, visit our website at thebeancast.com and click on the subscribe link. If you're an iTunes listener, we've also provided a direct link to the iTunes Music Store, or just search for the BeanCast in the podcast directory of iTunes. And whichever podcast directory you use, when you subscribe, please leave us a review. Got a comment? Have a question? We'd love to hear from you. Just send your emails to beancast@gmail.com. Opening theme was performed by Joe Seibel. Closing theme by C. Jax. Thanks for listening. I'm Bob Norp. We'll be back again next week. Hope you'll join us then.
It's like, you know what I mean? It's like if it's, you know what I mean? I don't know, man. Just like, okay, it's like, you know what I mean? Like, it's like totally like that. It's like, I don't know, like if it's, you know, it's like, you know what I mean? Yeah, it's just like kind of, it just seems like it's just like almost exactly. It's like exactly. Yeah. You know what I mean? Exactly.
Cool beans.